My Life and Struggle, Autobiography of Badshah Khan, Story of the Frontier Gandhi, a legend of courage and patriotism. Foreword. This is an invaluable work. Of course, there have already been published several biographies of Badshah Khan. The first in the field was the book by Sri Pyare Lal. Then came the biography in English written by Sri Tendulkar. Recently, Sri Joshi published a biography of Badshah Khan in Marathi. The present work, however, is the autobiography of Frontier Gandhi. Biographies written by others can be several, but there can only be one autobiography. And when it is the own story of a seeker of truth, it becomes unique because of its authoritativeness. Badshah Khan was one of the leading generals of the undivided India's freedom struggle. Because of his heroism and his devotion to non-violence, the Indian people had conferred upon him the title of Frontier Gandhi. While those of that generation who are still with us are aware of the important contributions made by Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, for the people of the new generation, he is a distant historical figure whose image has become dim. If they can have some acquaintance with that extraordinary character, some glimpse of that shining light, they will automatically move from darkness towards light. The publication of this book at any time would have been important event. Because of a special reason, its publication at this time has become still more significant. Readers may be aware that a committee has been set up in the country to organize the birthday celebration of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and I have the good fortune of being its chairman. The main objective of this committee is to invite Badshah Khan to visit India during the present Gandhi Centenary year. People will be glad to know that Badshah Khan has accepted our invitation. Thus, the publication of this book at a time when the Indian people are going to see Badshah Khan face to face is very timely and useful for the country. To begin with, the book will be published in Hindi, Urdu, and English. I do hope that there will be no one among the educated community who will not read this autobiography on this auspicious occasion. At the end, congratulations to Kanwar Bhan Narang and Ram Saran Nagina and to the Gandhi Samrak Nidhi, because of whose devotion, dedication, and hard work this unique book is being presented to the public. Jaya Prakash Narayan, New Delhi. My childhood. I was born in the house of Khan Bahram Khan in the village of Osmanzai in Hashtan Nagar, now famous as Hashtan Nagar. In those days, it was not custom in our families to keep the record of the date and year of the birth of one's children. Besides, very few people knew how to read and write. Therefore, there is no record of the date of and the year of my birth, but I also have good reason to believe that I was born in 1890 because my mother used to tell me that my brother, Dr. Khan Sahab, was married when I was 11 years old. He was married in 1901, so I think it is correct to say that I was born in 1890. My father was one of the great Khans, chieftains or rulers of his village, but he had none of the arrogance and vanity of his chieftainship. He was extremely even-tempered, God-fearing, sober, generous, compassionate, and of noble character. In any feud, he would always protect the oppressed. If anybody wronged him, he never tried to take revenge. On the contrary, he would forgive the wrongdoer and overlook what he had done. My mother too was most generous and liberal by nature. She used to prepare food for the poor people of the neighborhood and distribute it herself. Sometimes travelers came to stay in the hujra. Hujra is common guest house for travelers either in the village or in the mosque. Most Khans have their own hujras. And we did not always know who they were, but whether they were casual travelers or our own guests. My father always carried their meals to their rooms himself. Though we had servants, my father carrying the basket of bread on his head and the plate of curry on his hand, would go to the travelers or the guest's room and serve food with his own hands. For my father would always say, the unknown traveler is also a guest sent to us by God, and therefore I must serve him myself. Unlike the other Khans, my father was no admirer of the government. He never established any relations with the ruling powers, and the thought of offering them service or flattery never occurred to him. My grandfather, Saifullah Khan, lived by the same principles. At the time when fighting had broken out in Surkave and the British wanted to take possession of Bonaire, some of the Khans of our country were giving them help and support. But my grandfather, Saifullah Khan, chose the side of the oppressed countrymen and cast his lot with the heroic fighters who were opposing the foreign rulers. Whenever and wherever the British were fighting, attacking our people, or trying to make them their slaves, my grandfather always stood firmly on the side of his countrymen and fought shoulder to shoulder with those who were suffering under the oppression of the foreign power. My great grandfather, Abdullah Khan, was famous, powerful, and well loved as a guide and advisor to his people. Because of his enlightened mind and his fervent patriotism, he was put to death at the hands of Durrani, who was the ruler of the country at that time. When, after Durrani's British rule was established, our country was annexed to Punjab. The British had opened many schools in Punjab, but in our country no steps had been taken to educate our children. There was no love lost between the Pathans and the British, neither did the Punjabis have any sympathy for us. The government officials in our country were all Punjabis. There were a few primary schools in the larger villages, but hardly any Pathan teachers. In the schools which the British had opened in all parts of India, children received education in their respective mother tongues. But ours was the only unfortunate country where no arrangements for education were made, and in the few schools that existed, the children were taught in a language which was not their own. It was a matter of great regret that though the British had established a few schools for our children, they had also left amidst us very orthodox mullahs. Mullahs are one learned in Muslim theology and law, who were held in reverence by the people and who pronounced anyone studying in these schools an unbeliever. They made propaganda against the schools, saying, "Parents who send their children to these schools do so only for the sake of money. There will be no place in heaven for any pupil of these schools. They will be thrown into hell." The real purpose of this propaganda was to keep the Pathans illiterate and uneducated, and this was the reason that, with regard to education, the Pathans were most backward in India. There was no other way for the Pathan children to receive education. In the mosque, pupils were taught to some extent in the name of religion, but the instruction was given by the mullahs, and those who took advantage of it mostly did in order to become imams. Imam is a Muslim priest. But the common people were not interested in this kind of education, because before the coming of Islam, our people had been Hindus, and the misconception that education is only for the Brahmins still prevailed in our society. The result of this was that we created divisions amongst ourselves, very much like the Hindu caste system. Though my father had not received any formal education himself, he loved knowledge and learning and took a great interest in it. I was only 5 years old when I was sent to the mosque to be instructed by the mullah. The poor mullah, however, was devoid of learning and practically illiterate, so how could he be expected to teach me the art of reading and writing? He knew some surahs of the Holy Quran by heart. He was even able to read the Holy Quran, but I very much doubt whether he understood one word of it. Mullah began to teach me the 30 chapters of the Holy Quran. On the day when I started reciting the Quran, my father and mother distributed sweets. They were very happy that my education had become. Funny thing was that the mullah was not really competent to teach me as much as the ABCs even. Yet he started teaching me the Quran. How could he, who could himself not recite half the alphabet, be expected to teach me the Quran? Yet the poor mullah was not to be blamed, for he only followed the method of teaching that was prevalent in our country at that time. Our teacher was very cruel and he used to beat us mercilessly. After some time, I had learned the whole Quran by heart. My father and mother were very happy and rejoiced at my completing this holy task. The Pathans were very keen on education, and most of them sent their children to the mosque for instruction because no other schools were available, and also because they were not familiar with any other kind of learning. And supposing there had been schools in any of the big towns, the mullahs would not have allowed parents to send their children there, for they insisted that all this worldly learning was kufr, against religion. They reminded their pupils and other illiterate folk of the verse that was fast becoming a hit and could be heard in all the streets and marketplaces. मदरसे वही पारा दे पैसे वही जन्नत के बाए जाए नवी तो जख के बाए रसे वाली. Those who learn in schools, they are none but money's tools. In heaven they will never dwell, they will surely go to hell. Fortunately for me, God had blessed me with a brave and broad-minded father and a saintly and loving mother, both of whom ignored the mullah's condemnation and took no notice of what the neighbors said. They sent my brother, Dr. Khan Sahib, to school, and as far as I know, he was the first boy in Hashtnagar to be educated in a school. When I had finished studying the Holy Quran, my parents sent me to school too. I was 8 years old then. The mullahs secretly tried to spread slander against my parents, but they did not have the courage to forbid me going to school, nor did they dare to call my parents unbelievers. My father was an influential and respected Khan, and therefore the mullahs could not openly speak against him. Our cultural heritage. It fills my heart with sadness to think that our country, which at different periods in history was the cradle of learning and culture, could, under unfavorable circumstances and because of the ignorance of mullahs, sink into a state where there was no room left for such good work as education and learning. Our country has seen many cultures and come and go. There was a time when she was the cradle of Aryan civilization. Then Buddha came and preached his gospel. When Buddhism was spreading, our country made great progress, evidence of which can be found in the great relics of that age. Even today, two magnificent statues of Gautam the Buddha can be seen in Bamiyan. They are probably the largest statues of Buddha in the world, standing at the foot of the mountain carved out of the rock. They present an unparalleled example of the perfection in the art of sculpture. In the mountainside around these giant statues, there are caves where the Buddhist priests, monks, spiritual preceptors, and their disciples used to live. There was also a great Buddhist university at Ada near Jalalabad, the ruins of which can still be seen. There was another university at Taxila. The ruins of the buildings and the remains of idols and images carved with delicate skill in the wood and stone are the evidence of a highly developed culture of the Pathans at the time. Our country had progressed to such an extent that we were able to reach out as far as China and as the Far East in order to spread our culture and the message of Buddha. Only a few years ago, the archaeological department started excavations near our village. A large town was dug out, which it is said was the center of the Gandhara Shahi family. And if we delve into the pages of history a little deeper, we shall find that this country of the Pathans, which was known as Afghanistan or Pakhtunistan at the time, was the cradle of one of the greatest families of mankind. Historians have found evidence that the Aryan race first saw the light of the day in this country on the banks of the river Amu, and that it was on this very soil that their lofty culture first flourished. Later, when the population increased, the need for new pastures was felt and people gradually migrated to other countries. In one direction, this migration took them through Iran into Europe, and in the other direction into Hindustan, and thus they were divided into different nations and communities. Under different geographical conditions, the fundamental national characteristics of the Aryan changed, and new cultures and new languages came into existence. But when the people of Aryan race lived in their original land, Aryano Vijo, which is now Afghanistan and Pakhtunistan. Pakhtunistan is the area comprising of the former NWFP up to Attock and Jhelum tribal territories, political agencies, states, and Balochistan. They had a common language, which has now been given the hypothetical name of the Aryan language. Pashto is very close to this Aryan language. Because the Pathans lived in very high and inaccessible mountainous regions and were cut off from outside influences, this country was called Aryana Vijo. It was here in the same Aryana Vijo that the first prophet in history, Zoroaster, was born. As far as it is known, he was a native of Balkh, but later he went to Iran. In his books, which can be read even today, he sang the glories of Balkh. It was also here the songs of the Vedas, the holy hymns of the Hindus, were composed. Another great son of this country was Panini, who wrote in a Sanskrit grammar and thus acquainted the world with this ancient language. Panini was a resident of what is now the Tehsil of Sawabi on the bank of the Indus. It is interesting to note that the name of a river, Indus, the name of the country, Sindh, and the name of the people, Hindu, are all derived from a Pashto word, Sindh, which means river. Of the huge family of the Aryans, after many had left during the Great Migration, only two branches remained, the Pakhtuns and the Balochs. Into their hands, God had given the sacred task of looking after the safety and the progress of their country. Later, Islam came into this country. By that time, the Arabs had lost much of their spiritual light and the divine fire and the piety which the Prophet of Islam had poured into their hearts, and which great men like Abu Bakr and Umar had propagated. The Arabs were intoxicated with the idea of extending their empire and blinded by the desire to conquer their other countries. The result was that our splendid culture was taken away from us, but they did not give us in its place the true spirit of Islam. There were, however, some lovers of learning and seekers of God wandering through the Islamic world in search of the real Islam, who acquired scholarship in Islamic philosophy, learning, and mysticism. Of this we can be truly proud. Career versus patriotism. I received my primary education at the Municipal Board High School in Peshawar. Afterwards, I went to a mission school. A little later, my brother finished his course of study at this school and went to Bombay to study medicine. I stayed at the mission school with the Barani Kaka, my servant. Barani Kaka often told me stories about army and impressed upon me what a good and honorable thing it was to be a soldier. He used to paint glamorous pictures of young officers dressed in splendid uniforms and flourishing their swords, marching at the head of their companies. Barani Kaka's thrilling stories had such an effect upon me that I developed a strong desire to join the army. Without consulting my parents or asking for their consent, I sent an application to the Commander-in-Chief of India for a direct commission and waited for the reply. This was to take some time as, of course, the government had to make inquiries about me. Meanwhile, I had been promoted from the 9th to the 10th class at the school. I was halfway through the matriculation examination when I received an official letter saying that my request for a direct commission had been granted and that I was to report at the recruiting office at 10 o'clock the next morning. I was very happy because in those days getting a direct commission made one a very important person. In my exaltation, I did not bother to finish the examination. I duly presented myself before the recruiting officer, and after I had been examined, my name was enrolled for the direct commission. A regiment of cavalry and infantry known as the Guides was stationed at Mardan. It was one of the most famous and highly acclaimed regiments in India. Admission into it was not easy, and even rich and influential families found it difficult to get their sons enlisted in this regiment. About 20 of the boys were from good Punjabi families. I was selected for a direct commission in the regiment because I was a very handsome young man. I was 6 feet 3 inches tall and almost a matriculate. These were the reasons why the British officers liked me and wanted me to join the regiment. My father not only gave his consent, but he was delighted at my good fortune. One day I had gone to Peshawar to see a friend of mine who was a cavalry officer in this regiment, and we were standing and talking in the street when an English lieutenant passed by. My friend was bareheaded. He sported a fashionable haircut, and a thick mop of hair adorned his forehead. When the English lieutenant saw this, he became furious and cried, "Really, you damn Sardar Sahab? So you want to be an Englishman, do you?" My friend turned deadly pale, but he did not have the courage to reply. This incident left a deep impression on me. Had not Barani Kaka always told me of the respect one was treated with in the army? But here I had witnessed the worst possible insult. On that day, I gave up the idea of joining the army or seeking any employment with the British. My father was rather annoyed with me and did not approve of my decision because obtaining a direct commission was considered a great honor in those days. But I could not see any honorable aspect of it. Neither could I find any evidence of the respect I had been told about. On the contrary, I had witnessed an incident of gross and despicable insult. As my father was angry with me, I wrote to my brother, who had by now left Bombay and gone to England, where he had been admitted into a medical college. I told him that I had changed my mind about being a servant of the British government because it did not give one any respect. In fact, it made one a slave, and one risked getting insulted in the bargain. Dr. Khan Sahib was very happy about my decision. He wrote to my father and that he thought I had done the right thing and shown good sense. He begged my father not to be angry with me and not to force me into the army. So I applied myself to the studies again. With a companion, I went to Camp Belpur, where I was admitted to a high school. Unfortunately, Camp Belpur had a very hot climate, which did not agree with me, and I had to leave. I then went to Qadian, but I did not like the atmosphere there either. One night I dreamt that I had fallen into a very deep well. I was wondering how to save myself when a man who was passing by saw the plight I was in and, bending down, stretched out his hand. I grasped it, and the man pulled me out of the well. Then he said, "Why did you throw yourself into the well? Did you not see it was there?" In the morning, when I told my companion about the dream, he agreed with me that we should leave this place as soon as possible. We both went back to our village but did not stay there long. Soon my companion went to Peshawar to take admission in a high school, and I proceeded to Aligarh and went to a college there. As I could not get accommodation in the hostel, I became a day scholar and took a room in the hotel in the town. I used to spend the day at the college and return to the hotel in the evening. When the summer vacation began, I went back to my village for the holidays. Upon my arrival at home, I learned that my father had received a letter from my brother in England, in which he suggested that I should go to England to study engineering. "I will continue my medical studies," he wrote, "and he, meaning me, can go to an engineering college. He will do well because he has always been good at geometry." My father discussed the proposal with me, and after due consideration, he decided to send me to London. My brother was informed, and he booked my passage on the P&O boat. My father very generously gave me 3,000 rupees, and I was ready to go. But when I went to my mother to take leave, as is our custom, and I asked her, "May I go, Ma?" she began to cry and would not let me go. I did my utmost to explain to her that I had to go, but I could not make her understand. I said to her, "Just look at our country, Ma. The British have sown the seeds of dissension, of factionalism, of hypocrisy among the people. Innocent people are dragged into courts, and people who have committed no crime are put to death. And because of the disunity and the envy among the faction minded elements, sinners often go scot free, while innocent people are thrown into prison. Nobody's life is safe here." But whatever I said, my mother would not agree to my going. People had told her, and this idea was now firmly fixed in her mind, that Vilayat was the kind of foreign country from where nobody had ever returned. "One of your sons has gone there already," people had warned her. "If you now allow your second son also to go, you will be left alone, and who will look after you in your old age?" There were only two of us. We had no other brother. One she had already lost, and therefore she would not allow me to leave her. I loved my mother very much, and she was extremely fond of me. How could I go to England without her consent? So I gave up the idea of going abroad and decided that henceforth I would devote myself to service of my country and my people, the service of God and humanity. Education, Orthodoxy, and Slavery. In 1901, the British separated our province from Punjab, and they introduced new and brutal laws in our province, laws such as not even Halaku Khan would have enforced on the people. This law was called the Frontier Crimes Regulation Act. It was such a brutal and savage act, we called it the Black Law, and the British used it in such an atrocious manner that it created communalism, disharmony, and mutual enmity among the Pathans. No longer did they live together in harmony and unity. Besides, this uncivilized act did great damage to our self-respect and honor. Even our women were sometimes arrested and taken to the court. Under this obnoxious law, the police could start a fictitious case against anyone the British happened to dislike. No proof or evidence was necessary. Of course, the man would be brought before the jirga, an assembly of elders, but it was not a people's jirga. The British had created their own jirgas of their own people, and a man could be sentenced to 12 to 14 years in jail without any right of appeal. For example, there was a case of Habib Noor, when in 1931 the British were putting great pressure on the Congress movement and persecuting the Khudai Khidmatgar, servants of God, at Charsadda. Habib Noor was greatly agitated. When the British Assistant Commissioner in Charsadda began to hear cases in court, Habib Noor also went there. He took a revolver with him with the intention of sending the Assistant Commissioner to hell. But when he pulled the trigger, the revolver did not go off. Habib Noor thereupon lifted the Assistant Commissioner off his feet and dashed him to the ground, saying, "All right, I can't kill you, but I can at least bring you to your knees." Of course, the police came and arrested him. Within 24 hours, he was hanged. I only mentioned this as an example. There were innumerable cases like this, and many suffered worse violence and injustice. There was another section of this act known as the Section 40. This Section 40 was supposedly concerned with the punishment of crimes, but the British always used it against political prisoners. And leave alone the British. Pakistan is using this same act against the patriotic Pathans even today. A man may be walking along the road, minding his own business. Suddenly he may be stopped and asked to furnish security. Naturally, he would ask what offense he had committed. He would be told, "Never mind that, but just pay the security." And if he refuses, he will be sent to jail for 3 years. I and thousands of my fellow workers were put in the prison under this Section 40. These tyrannical and unjust laws were introduced in 1901 when the British also separated our province from Punjab. The reason was that the anti-British Pathans had begun to look upon those foreigners, the British, as their enemies who were forcing them into slavery. A strong and violent opposition movement had sprung up among the Pathans, and whenever and wherever they encountered an Englishman, they tried to harm or kill him. Many Britishers lost their lives in this way, and the British government retaliated by sending many Pathans to the gallows. The purpose, the whole purpose and design behind the creation of this new province and the promulgation of black laws was to stamp out the opposition movement. The mullahs and the elders in our country were puppets in the hands of the British, and they continued to forbid people from having their children educated. The British had implanted the ideas into their minds that if the Pathans were to become educated and started thinking for themselves, the mullahs would lose their business and there would be no more donations of money for them. I tried to explain things to mullahs, but they could not and would not understand. I told them, look here, Islam teaches that it is the duty of every man to acquire knowledge and wisdom. By all means, tell people not to send their children to British schools, but then also tell them to build schools of their own where their children can be educated. That would be a service to the country. But as long as the people are unable to build national schools, their children should go to British schools rather than remain ignorant and uneducated. But the mullahs were not willing to follow my advice. One day, it was in the summer, I was in Murray. A mullah was staying with me as my guest. In the evening, we went out for a walk. As we were strolling down the road, we came upon a very nice bungalow. I stopped and asked, Mullah Sahab, take a look at that bungalow. What do you think of it? It is very beautiful house. He replied, I like it very much. Just look at the garden, look at the flowers, and look at the man who lives here. Do you know who he is? I don't know, said the mullah. Who is he? He is an Englishman, mullah. I told him. You see, mullah sahab, if a country makes progress and prospers, its priests can also live well. In a country where people can afford to live in bungalows like this and travel around in motor cars, and the priests can also live in beautiful houses and go about in motor cars. But as long as our country does not make progress and the people remain ignorant, our mullahs will never be able to live in better conditions. They will remain in the same miserable state they are in now. Please remember this, Mullah Sahab. If the country makes progress, you will also benefit. But we remain ignorant and do not improve ourselves and our circumstances, you will share our lot. Our hands will remain empty and you will have to go begging from door to door for your stipend. Compare your life to the life of the English priest. What a difference. But my words were wasted on the mullah. If God himself could not make him understand, what could I do? I was educated in a mission school and my teachers were padres, missionaries. Many of my friends and companions went to Islamia school at Peshawar. While in school, there awoke in my heart a great love for my country and my people and a strong desire to serve my country and my community. But my friends who went to different schools did not seem to have that surging love for their country, nor any desire to serve her. I gave this question a great deal of thought, and I came to the conclusion that the credit must go to those teachers under whose guidance it was my privilege to study. A pupil is bound to be influenced by his teachers, and it was the example of my teachers that inspired in me the desire to serve God and humanity. My teacher was a British padre, Mr. E.F.E. Wigram. He had a brother who was a doctor. It was said that they were the beloved sons of a very distinguished parent, and that their father had dedicated both brothers to the mission, and that he paid their salaries from his own pocket. The elder brother was the headmaster of the mission high school, and the younger brother was a doctor in the mission hospital. They served the people with sincerity and love, as I could witness because I was then living in the hostel, which was close to their bungalow. At that time, the hostel was in the same place where the mission college building stands now. Our headmaster, Mr. Wigram, used to give scholarships to 3 or 4 poor or orphan students from his own salary. These things impressed me very much, and I said to myself, look at us, Muslim Pathans, we don't have enough sympathy to help or serve our poor needy brothers. And these people are foreigners, they belong to a different nation and a different faith, yet they have come to serve our people. What sympathy and love for humanity they must have. There is a Persian proverb, "Kharbuza ra kharbuza dida rang mein girad," which means when a melon sees another melon, it takes on its color. So the color of the service and dedication that I saw in Mr. Vigram and his brother must have fallen on me too. I would have loved to go to England and study among the devoted and sincere people like them. But as my mother would not give me the permission to go, I had to give up on that idea, and it was then that I vowed to dedicate my life and to the service of God and humanity. I was well aware that the illiteracy and the ignorance of my people could only lead them to ruin and destruction. Therefore, my first task, as I saw it, would be to try to eliminate illiteracy. No help was expected from the mullahs, so a few friends and I got together to discuss what could be done to light the lamp of knowledge in the dark world of ignorance our people were living in. We found a great and valuable helper in Haji Sahab of Tarangzai. Haji Sahab's main interest was in social reforms. He wanted to see outdated and useless traditions disappear. He wanted to found Islamic schools and struggled to achieve this. The British arrested him, but when they saw how angry this made his followers, they released him. To be able to fight the British, he left his own district and fought for freedom of the country until the end of his life. As an Englishman said of him, to have let Haji Sahab of Tarangzai slip through our fingers was the first and the greatest blunder we made in India. Haji Sahab was a real patriot and a great saint. Under his guardianship, we founded a Darul Ilm, a college in Gadar, of which Maulvi Taj Muhammad became the in charge. He was assisted by Maulvi Fazl Muhammad Rabi and Maulvi Fazl Muhammad Makfi. In 1910, I and Maulvi Abdul Aziz opened a National Islamic School in Usmanzai. Through our continued efforts, many schools were opened all over the province. Large numbers of students were admitted and people began to take more and more interest in education. At the time, Zafar Ali Khan's newspaper, Zamindar, and Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad's Al-Hilal and other papers like Medina were beginning to gain great popularity, and we also subscribed to them. We not only read them avidly ourselves, but also read them out to others. In those days, people were not in the habit of reading newspapers, but as we told them about the papers and read them out to them, people became more and more interested. The police and the CID knew and blacklisted the names of the subscribers to Al-Hilal. Several boys from our province were studying at the Deoband, and Maulvi Fazle Rabbi and Maulvi Fazl Muhammad Makfi had very close relations with Deoband. Maulvi Fazle Rabbi himself had been educated at Deoband, therefore we used to go there off and on. The principal of the Educational Institute at Deoband, Muhammadul Hasan Sahib, was a great scholar. We were soon on very friendly terms with him because his heart was full of sympathy and love for his country and people. And we too were full of patriotic fervor. His main concern was how to free our country from the foreign slavery, and this thought was uppermost in our minds too. Through him, we also met Maulana Ubaidullah Sindhi. Maulana Ubaidullah Sindhi was a great revolutionary leader. During the British rule, he spent most of his time organizing revolutionary groups. He spent the last years of his life in Lahore, and even in his old age, he remained young at heart. And we were able to exchange thoughts and ideas with him. At that time, Maulana Sahab was lecturing on the Holy Quran to young English-educated students at Fatehpuri. He used to give rupees 50 to every student who passed BA examinations, for he reasoned, how can these young people who are getting an English education ever develop any love for their country and their religion, or feel emotionally committed to their people and their faith, unless they learn about their religion. Maulana Sahib's intentions were laudable, and he worked at his project with unflagging zeal and devotion. But alas, he was not successful. The saddest thing of all was that one of the Maulana's best pupils, over whose education he had taken great pains and spent a great deal of time, turned out to be a spy and an informer. For the sake of a few miserable coins, he used to report to the government on everything that had been discussed in his class. Just think, if the educated youths of the country become so money minded, if in their greed and avarice they can sink so low that they are willing to betray their own country and their faith for a few copper coins, how can one ever hope to instill in their hearts a passionate love for their country and a burning desire for service? The reason why Muslims ruined themselves was that they began to love wealth and possessions. When these things became important and they became worshippers of Mamun instead of God, they lost their honor, their dignity, and sank into ignominy. In Fatehpuri, I also met Maulvi Saifur Rahman, and I got to know him quite well. He was from our district, but he had been a professor at the Arabic College at Fatehpuri for a long time. In those days, British had succeeded in frightening people who lived in constant fear of the government repression. But we managed to go to Deoband occasionally and secretly for discussions and consultations with our friends and colleagues there.